I hate to cut you off in the middle of that song. I love that song. Maybe you can play that a little later, Kevin. Oh. That's not the right slide. I did. I'm not sure why that's still in there. That's a mistake. But can you restart the slideshow? Thanks. I did make some changes. I think that one's still in there. Sometimes when you reuse things, it saves work, and sometimes you miss things.
Still there.
Just get back to the first slide. Thanks. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and in miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Come and let us worship together. I invite you to join me in singing our opening hymn, We Shall Be Known, by Carisha Longacre of Ma Muse. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. And so our music is in the spirit of our theme of this month of activism, and particularly today of climate justice. The music, the songs we are singing are from the climate justice movement. And often when you're out at protests, well, you don't have the advantage of having a piano there with you that you can just wheel up and play music. So we're mostly going to be singing as we do out in the streets, which is just a cappella and making beautiful music together that way. So I know this is a song we've sung several times, and so if you know it, feel free to sing along. If not, you can pick it up pretty easy. We'll sing it through a few times, probably 3 times. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now. And what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now. And what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. And I invite you to remain risen for our chalice lighting words and then our covenant.
Our chalice lighting words today are by Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming multiple truths. Now please join me in reciting our covenant in English and Spanish. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, thus do we covenant. La doctrina de esta iglesia es el amor. La búsqueda de la verdad es su sacramento, y el servicio es su oración. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar el conocimiento en libertad, servir a la humanidad en comunión, este es nuestro pacto. You can take. Let us remember that the land we're located on and live from is the unceded land of the Tongva, Kizh, and Chumash and Tataviam peoples, past and present. And so, good morning. And welcome to Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Julie Borden. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm happy to be your worship associate today. Emerson has a long history as an active and engaged congregation here in the West Valley. We're grateful that Unitarian Universalism provides a place for us to come together and acknowledge what is meaningful and sacred in a community of people from all religious backgrounds and no religious background at all. We're united by a commitment to liberal values, mutual respect, and inclusivity. It's good to see those of you who are here in person, and we want to offer a warm welcome to those of you joining us online as well. I want to extend a special welcome to anyone who is new here. If you didn't get a chance to sign our guest book in the foyer, please do when you get a chance, and or by following the link in the chat. After the service, everyone is welcome to join us for coffee behind those sliding doors to my right. And those of you on Zoom can stick around for our virtual coffee hour. Today is the latest installment in our Sacred Cinema series. And the movie we're discussing is How to Blow Up a Pipeline, a fictional story about a group of young climate activists who come together to strategically detonate an oil pipeline in West Texas. Each of the main characters have been impacted by climate change or environmental racism in a devastating way in their own personal lives. One lost her mother during an extreme heat wave. Another is diagnosed with cancer attributed to pollution from oil refineries. Some have a history of engaging in nonviolent activism, like divestment campaigns, and have become disillusioned, observing that despite all their work and commitment, things are getting worse and not better. The movie is fiction, but it is inspired by the nonfiction book of the same name by Swedish activist and ecology professor Andreas Malm. In his book, Malm poses the question, when is the destruction of the planet by the fossil fuel industry enough of an emergency that it merits more extreme action? Malm distinguishes between violence against humans, which he declares a non-starter, and destruction of fossil fuel infrastructure. But some might see property damage as violence in itself, its own kind of violence, which leads us, as you use, to ask ourselves how we balance our commitment to respect for the interdependent web of existence with our commitment to nonviolence. For me, this movie was hard to watch. It was especially hard to watch because my gut reaction was not to have any kind of moral outrage over what the characters were doing, but to feel that it was justified. It made me ask myself, what happened to me? I was raised to believe in law and order, and those messages stuck to me tightly, even as I learned more about the reasons for activism. So it made me question, what do I believe in? Do I condemn or condone? And does it even matter if I'm not willing to risk doing any kind of such actions myself? Those are the questions we'll be exploring today. But first, in a moment, I'm going to invite you to greet your neighbors. For those of us joining online, you can greet your neighbors in the chat. During this time, if there are any joys and sorrows you'd like shared with the congregation, you're invited to write them in our Book of Life on the table to my right, and/or use the link for the virtual Book of Life. Now let's greet our neighbors in a spirit of welcome. So welcome everyone who's with us today, both in person and online. For anyone who's with us for the first or second time, we'd like to offer you a special welcome. We'd love to meet you after the service at our coffee hour, which, as I said, takes place in the pavilion. And for those online, please stay after the service for a chance to chat in Zoom breakout rooms. It is good to be together this morning.
So I'm the Reverend Matthew McHale, and my pronouns are he and him. And today we have a story called The Brave Little Parrot. And this is an ancient story. It's a Jataka tale. It's a tale from India. And the Jataka tales are stories of the Buddha's past lives. So in Buddhism, there's a belief in reincarnation. So before he was incarnated as the Buddha, he took many different forms, most of which were actually, I believe maybe all of them were animal forms. And so this one is when the Buddha was a parrot. And ecologist and cancer survivor Sandra Steingraber, who is an expert on the environmental links to cancer, especially the health effects of fracking for natural gas, and a leading advocate for banning fracking in New York State, would tell this story when people would tell her that she couldn't make a difference. Once, there was a parrot who lived in the forest. And one day, the forest caught fire. Since the parrot was able to fly, she started to fly away. Then she heard the crying of the animals and insects trapped in the forest. And when the parrot heard their cries for help, she thought to herself, I cannot just go away. I have to help my friends. So the parrot flew back to the river, where she soaked all of her feathers, and then she flew back to the forest, and she shook her feathers all over the forest to sprinkle the water, but it was very little water, not nearly enough to stop a forest fire. So she went back to the river and wet her feathers again, and she did this over and over again. But the fire was so hot and so strong that her feathers were scorched and burned, and she was choking on the smoke. And even though she was not doing well, almost close to dying, she kept going back and forth. Now, up in the God realms, some of the gods were looking down and laughing, saying, look at that silly little parrot. She's trying to put out that forest fire, that huge forest fire, with her tiny wings. Now, one of the gods wanted to see this for himself. And so he transformed himself into a giant eagle and flew down. And the eagle called out, Hey, foolish parrot, what are you doing? You're not doing any good, and you're about to be burned alive. Get away while you can. The parrot replied, You are such a big bird. Why don't you help me put out the fire? I don't need your advice. I need your help. And the little parrot said this with so much courage and so much conviction that the eagle, who was actually the king of all of the gods, shed tears because he was so moved. And his tears were so powerful that they put out the fire. Some of those tears also fell on the parrot's burned and singed feathers. And wherever the tears fell, the feathers grew back in different colors. And this is how parrot gained its beautiful colors. And for me, this story goes to show that You never know what effect one small creative action can have. Indeed, New York State banned hydraulic fracturing in December 2014 and then made it permanent in 2020. So we can make differences. And these are the sort of stories and ideas that give me hope. And so now I invite you to join me in saying our Unitarian Universalist affirmation together. If you know the hand signals, you can do them with me. If not, they're pretty easy to pick up. We are Unitarian Universalists, a people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. So 2 of the characters in How to Blow Up a Pipeline grew up in West Long Beach, California, surrounded by pollution from the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, the 710 freeway corridor, a trash incinerator, and 4 oil refineries. One of the characters, as Julie mentioned earlier, Theo, contracts a rare form of terminal cancer, which she learns is not so rare in polluted communities like hers. And as part of her motivation to try and blow up this pipeline, she tells a story of dancing in the rain as a child, only to come home with her skin covered in little red welts. It reminded me of a poem by Bunyan Bryant, a pioneer of environmental justice, who helped bring to light the way environmental harms most often fell on poor communities and communities of color. The poem goes like this: kids with itchy skin and watering eyes beneath the weight of polluted skies, of lead, zinc, cadmium, PCBs, and arsenic too, makes clear skies hard to view. Of xylene, ethylene, benzene, and chlorine, while men in dark suits commute in limousine. Landfills and incinerators abound, as if we had the only land in town. Now, the work for healthy communities for all, which Dr. Bryant pioneered, is the work being carried forward by our Share of the Plate recipient for this month, Communities for a Better Environment. In fact, CBE's key focus area, one of their key focus areas over most of their 40-year history, has been helping local residents in those very communities along the 710 corridor, advocating and empowering them to advocate for themselves for cleaner neighborhoods. And its successes there include helping stop a freeway expansion and tightening environmental regulations on the refineries. And so I invite you to please give generously to their important work. Donations can be made at donate.emersonyuuc.org or using the Breeze CHMS mobile app and by selecting Sunday offering. If you're writing a check, please make checks payable to Emerson UU Church and write Share the Plate in the memo. And if you'd like to make a payment on a pledge instead, please write pledge in the memo. Our offerings will now be gratefully received. Thank you. receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. Each week we take time in our service to lift up those joys and sorrows from within our community and in the wider world. This week in our book of life, Andrea Reuter writes, "Thoughts for my dad, Jack Reuter, who is suffering from Parkinson's, cancer, and now pain due to a broken shoulder from a recent fall. Also for his life partner, Kathy, who suffered a TIA, presumably from the stress of being a caretaker." An anonymous gratitude for the brief period of cooler temperatures following last week's storm, while also holding the damage that was caused by the hurricane and the storm. Gratitude that the destruction was not worse than it was, and also our thoughts going to those who will have a long road towards recovery. Nicole Thibodeau writes in our virtual book of life, "We were able to meet with some UU friends who are visiting from Colorado, and our balcony was just the right size for iced tea and social distancing. Also, my niece is celebrating her 7th birthday today. Where did the time go?" Also like to lift up yet more cases of mass shootings, both those here in Southern California, a senseless act of violence that grew out of intimate partner violence, as well as the hate crime in Jacksonville, Florida yesterday, where a white man targeted and killed 3 black people at a convenience store, while also knowing it could have been worse had they not been turned away from their original target of a black, historically black college or university. In a moment, I'll sound this singing bowl, and after I do, I invite you to speak into this space or to type into the chat any joys or sorrows, any names or occasions that are on your heart this morning, and that you would like lifted up into this community in this, our embracing meditation. For all that has been shared and all that is too tender yet to share, and we hold in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. We offer these into the embrace of this beloved community. I invite you to join me in a spirit of meditation or prayer. Just find a comfortable position. Maybe that means putting your feet on the ground and just centering yourself, closing your eyes or softening your gaze. Taking a breath in and out, breathing at whatever pace feels natural to you. May we recognize and abandon the familiar attitudes and practices that do not serve the whole. We are who we are, and we have the opportunity to be who we want to be, to create a new inheritance for the future. May our thoughts, words, and actions in our daily lives assist in dismantling paradigms of oppression and suffering. May we give thanks for our individual place in time and space, to our families and our relationships that touch and change us. May we give thanks to the wise teachers who help us remember how to be and the chance to make it so. Underneath and within these stories and histories is our humanity. Being human means we are of this earth. We are these waters. We are fire and atmosphere. We are the sun and the moon and the stars. We are all that we see, and the wisdom is revealed by looking in between. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. Sing that with me. When the world is sick, can't no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. One more time. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong.
This poem is by Stephen Collis, who is a Vancouver poet who wrote it while defending Burnaby Mountain, land unceded by Coast Salish tribes against the Trans Mountain Tar Sands oil pipeline in Canada. His poetry was used against him in court when the pipeline builder brought a $5.6 million lawsuit against Collis and 4 others for their peaceful protest to halt construction. The lawsuit was later dropped. I was in a park. I could not see global capitalism, its dinosaur bones covered in chrome. I saw trees, their leaves turning yellow and golden brown. I saw the harbor and the city set down below the mountain, a place you'd descend to or ascend from. I asked someone, how do we resist? Consider the trees bending in the wind, their root grip deep in the land. Consider the mountain that does not drift a little east or west, north or south, but remains a marker we chart days' circuits round. I asked, what if they come with saw teeth for the trees, with horizontal directional drilling for pipelines through mountain's immobile heart? And one there said, sometimes the voice, sometimes the voices tear teeth from saw's blades. Sometimes a body, sometimes all our bodies, blunt the bits of drills, dull dollars' desire. Sometimes, someone said, someone just like you or me. Sometimes we resist. Sometimes we win.
Our second reading this morning comes from Dorothea Smart, who is a climate activist in England. Shake my future. Shake my future. Push me past my complacency, my taken for granted, my comfort zone. Shake my future. Let me source the unimagined, be released from the sentence of the inevitable, take control, empower myself, past the dour predictions of the present, and change myself. Shake my future. Challenge our first world's capitalist, consumerist, criminal zone of perpetual purchasing. Shake my future past the edges of the known world. Launch me out into the hinterlands of the intuited imagined, beyond the droughts of apathy, and quench my thirst for something different. Shake my future with alternative endings. Curdle the milk of human kindness beyond the patronizing rattle of charity cans to preserve the poor and assuage my guilt. Shake my future with a kaleidoscope of tunes. Play some other melody and bliss me out of ignorance. Let my mind expand with a question. And seeking the answers, shake my future, shake my future, shake my future, in a triangle of tangential tirades, and beckon me into a sandwich of yes, we can, and hope. Our next song is one that I first heard in a protest, a climate protest. I can't tell you which one it was. It has become a favorite in recent years. And these songs this morning come to us from the Sunrise Movement's songbook. The Sunrise Movement, of course, is the youth-led climate justice movement that has been very active and a leader in the climate movement in the past half decade or so. And they put together this songbook of songs for people to sing in protests or indeed in churches as well. And so, again, I'm gonna teach this song to you. The first part goes like this. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Sing that with me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. One more time. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Listen. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. Waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. First part, there are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Let's start that one more time. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Please rise. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more fires burning, there are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will find their way to me. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more mountains falling, there are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. There are more mountains falling, they will find their way to me. There are more waters fighting, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. I will wade through the waters, I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will walk through the fires, I will walk through the fires, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know. I will walk through the fires when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fires, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know. Rebuild the mountains, I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. There's more water rising. There is more water rising, this I know, this I know. There is more water rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know. know, this I know, there are more waters rising, this I know. Please be seated. In the very first scene of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, we see Sochi here slashing the tires of a large SUV with a knife, and then leaving a leaflet under their windshield wiper explaining why their vehicle was sabotaged. Now, that was an allusion to Andreas Malm, the author of the nonfiction How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which inspired the fictional film. And back in 2007, Malm was part of a collective of saboteurs, activists, who slashed the tires of 6 SUVs in Stockholm, Sweden, and left notes on the windshield about how much gasoline SUVs burned and how it was all tied to the warming of the planet and the immense destruction that was causing, and explained that as SUV owners, they likely had money and they would probably just be inconvenienced, especially because the city had good public transit. And this group of saboteurs published a statement where they took credit for the action and called on others to copy their work and even include a simple manual explaining how to release air from a tire. 14 years later, Malm, now an academic who writes about human ecology and the history of fossil fuels, published How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And unlike the tire deflation manual, Malm does not actually cover how one would go about blowing up a pipeline. Instead, he wonders why the climate movement has avoided acts of overt sabotage and property destruction, and goes on to articulate why he thinks escalating tactics is necessary. Namely, that the nonviolent protests of the past have failed to bring about the necessary changes fast enough in the face of an existential crisis. Early on in the book, Malm quotes an essay published around the same time he was deflating tires, where John Lanchester notes, "It is strange and striking that climate change activists have not committed any acts of terrorism." And now I want to distinguish here between terrorism, which is the use or threat of violence, and an act of sabotage or property destruction as two separate things. And Malm unequivocally suggests that actions that harm human lives should not be seriously considered, but that property destruction should be part of the playbook of environmental activists. Well, I have conflicting feelings about property destruction, as I imagine many of you do. In seminary, I took a class on religiously grounded nonviolent protest movements, and we studied the legacy of religious leaders and activists like Dorothy Day, who co-founded the Catholic Worker, or Gandhi, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and Cesar Chavez, who used nonviolent resistance in the face of injustice and oppression. And they were all, of course, inspired by the civil disobedience of Henry David Thoreau, a close friend of our church's namesake, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And one of the arguments against escalating tactics is that once you start using the tactic of violence or sabotage, well, the problem is the state can wield that more effectively. They know how to do that through military and law enforcement. through the justice system, they can hit back much harder. They know how to respond to that. Yet Malm points out that violence is not the sole field where asymmetry prevails. The enemy, as he calls them, has overwhelmingly superior capabilities in virtually all fields, including media propaganda, institutional coordination, logistical resources, political legitimacy, and above all, money. So it kind of pokes a hole. Reading that, I hadn't really considered it in those terms, in that argument about the asymmetry. But also having studied it, I know that much of the power of nonviolent action, nonviolent protest, comes from the sense of moral righteousness. It's much harder to condemn those who engage in peaceful acts of civil disobedience. And you start to lose people as tactics escalate. Although, for those of you who were here 2 weeks ago, I will note, as King said, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, people who want to complain about tactics are often actually complaining about the changes and not the tactics. So that's a mixed one in and of itself. But it is true that some people can be turned off. And on the other hand, it's also true that many movements for nonviolence have often had parallel groups who were more militant or radical, which made the nonviolent protests seem more reasonable in comparison. Think Malcolm X versus Dr. King. And Malm also points to Nelson Mandela, who, in the struggle against apartheid, as a leader of the African National Congress, stuck for years to the practice of nonviolence, and found that after 2 decades of studiously engaging in nonviolence, that they had less rights than they had 20 years beforehand. And so, as Mandela would later say, I called for nonviolent protest for as long as it was effective, and as a tactic that should be abandoned when it no longer worked. And indeed, perhaps coincidentally, one of the first places that the ANC went after was an oil refinery, because they knew that oil was at the heart of the economic system and could do significant damage to the economy, which was their goal. Could undercut that. Now, the thing is, I don't think nonviolent resistance has been ineffective. There are countless examples of nonviolent movements making a difference in our world and helping create a more just world and moving us closer towards climate justice. Just a couple of examples that maybe are a step down from blowing up a pipeline. So back in 2016, there were 5 people who came to be known as the valve turners, who turned the emergency shutoff valves for 5 major oil pipelines, which provided about 15% of America's daily oil consumption. And all 5 were arrested, and they planned to be arrested. They informed the oil companies of what they were doing and waited to be arrested, and sought to argue in court a necessity defense, that they were justified in doing this work because of the grave dangers that fossil fuels were doing to our country, to our environment, to our future. Now, none of the judges who heard the cases allowed them to actually mount the necessity defense, yet only one of the valve turners, Michael Foster, a Unitarian Universalist, coincidentally, served jail time, 1 year of a 3-year sentence. I think, and my understanding is that part of the reason that he served a jail sentence is he was kind of strident. Again, Unitarian Universalist, sometimes we can be that. And then 3 years later, 4 members of the Catholic worker movement, again co-founded by Dorothy Day, were arrested for trying to shut down the Enbridge Line 4 pipeline in a similar act of protest. The Trans Mountain Pipeline in Canada, which Stephen Collis wrote about in the poem that Julie shared, well, that pipeline was not stopped by the countless nonviolent protests and legal challenges, and was actually set to finish construction later this year, although another delay just a few days or weeks ago may slow its completion down yet again to next year. And on the one hand, the pipeline is getting built, but on the other hand, it has been over 10 years since the pipeline was first proposed. And so it has been delayed for an incredibly long period of time. And in the meantime, the original estimated cost to build it has ballooned from $4 billion in US dollars to $22 billion today. And so all of that extra cost and uncertainty ensure that this will almost certainly be the last pipeline that Canada ever builds. Similarly, the protests at Standing Rock in 2016 accomplished similar effects of increasing the cost, of slowing its construction, of making similar projects seem less economically feasible and wise. And the Keystone XL pipeline, which was perhaps one of the great victories of the 2010 environmental justice movement, was officially killed in 2021 after a decade-long campaign to stop it. So we can see that nonviolent protests and legal cases have been effective in making fossil fuel projects increasingly unviable, effectively losing some of the battles but winning the war. But the thing is, this war is dragging on. And each year it does, the more devastating the consequences will be for our climate. When Sochi says of her growing disillusionment with the divestment movement she has been involved in her local college campus, she says, "It would be great if we still had time, but by the time any market solution does shift, billions of people will be dead from climate disaster. We need to act outside of the system. We need to start attacking the things that are killing us. And we need to take more drastic action, like actual sabotage, property destruction." Now, to Sochi, this battle feels personal because her mother died in a heat wave. Still, at this point, the greatest cause of deaths of natural disasters throughout the world, outpacing hurricanes and floods and earthquakes. If you put them all together, heat deaths would surpass them all. We often aren't able to recognize it yet. And for those of us living in Southern California, that is a very real fear and concern. And so I think most of us, when you watch the film, it's hard not to sympathize where she is coming from after losing her mother. But even if we don't have that profound loss, I think we can relate. People are feeling hopeless, helpless, desperate, and understandably so. I've heard it from so many of you in conversations, and I've felt it myself. As I was thinking about this service, I was trying to figure out what approach I would take in talking about it. And as I watched the movie and read more, I came to realize, I thought I might have qualms with the moral argument. about it. And in fact, the description of this service talks about the gray area of the morality. But as I wrote this, I found myself fairly clear that no, actually, I'm pretty clear on the morality. The immense destruction and devastation that will be caused by climate change far outweighs any harms that will be caused by the destruction of property. There is no comparison. No comparison. And so the question then becomes one primarily of tactics. Is this an effective tactic? Will it make a difference? And Malm does not suggest that we should all be going out and blowing up pipelines. He suggests that there may be smaller actions we can engage in, and that is only a part of it, that all of these other actions are important as well. All of these other things that we are currently doing, like the simple process of getting people to show up to vote in Virginia's election this come November, which our environmental justice ministry is writing letters after the service today to encourage young people to get out and vote in this critical election. That those actions are important too, that all of them are important, and it's just that we should not leave out direct action and destruction of property. That we need to get past this idea that fossil fuel companies have kind of created the situation that this idea that like property has the status of the ultimate sacred realm, like property is inviolable, you can't harm someone else's property. I mean, what? I mean, even if we were just focusing on property, look at the hurricanes and / tropical storm of last week. Even though that was not nearly as bad as it could have been, that has done roughly $8 billion in damage, in property damage caused by climate change. So even on a property level, this is destroying lives as well. And so again, these actions don't necessarily need to be as big as blowing up a pipeline. And Malm suggests that actually those might not even be the preferred actions, that small actions, more graceful and soft actions might make an even bigger difference. And so 2 years ago, as an example, a group calling themselves the Tire Extinguishers started deflating SUV tires because they pollute more. Increased SUV sales, in fact, increased SUV sales have offset all gains by electric cars. So all of those electric cars that people have been driving, well, the increase in SUV sales have basically made the balance even. But also because SUVs are much more deadly to pedestrians. And so after they deflate the tires, they leave a flyer that begins, "Attention, your gas guzzler kills. We have deflated one or more of your tires," and then tells the owner, "Don't take it personally. It's not you, it's your car." And they have called on others to replicate it, giving instructions on how to disarm an SUV, and they don't slash tires. Rather, they jam a lentil into the release valve so that it slowly deflates overnight. And then they share their stories on social media. Over their 2 years of existence, small autonomous groups of people have deflated the tires of almost 15,000 vehicles in 18 countries, and it continues to spread. And not surprisingly, they cited Andreas Malm as an inspiration. Now, in some ways, I think Malm, with his book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, was partially a case of writing the right book at the right time. And I think he realized that himself, that he wrote the book at a time when climate justice activists were getting increasingly frustrated and desperate by the state of things and by the inactivity, by the fact that, even when you elect the supposedly good, climate change president like Joe Biden, well, Joe Biden permitted more drilling leases for natural oil and gas in his first 2 years than Donald Trump or any other president did. And so these actions are picking up. And I think they would have anyway, but certainly the book has galvanized people. In England, activists have graffitied and smashed the windows of buildings linked to fossil fuel extraction companies, and others sabotage the site of construction of a new pipeline to bring jet fuel to London's airports. In Germany, dozens of people have gone into sabotage efforts to build a coal plant. In France, thousands of people blocked a project that would drain a local groundwater for an industrial agricultural growing operation. And so these mass movements of resistance are growing. And in some ways, we see this, that destroying property is a last resort. This is what Sochi says in her manifesto that she broadcasts out to the world. She says, destroying property was a last resort. If we want to survive, we must damage and dismantle CO2-emitting devices, demolish them, burn them, blow them up. Let those who profit from mass death know that their properties will be trashed. They will defame us and claim this was violence or vandalism, but this was justified. This was an act of self-defense. Now, I would not be surprised if one of the next targets were the private aircrafts or the yachts of the super rich, which are massively producing. I think one of the things that we have been tricked into thinking is that it's our responsibility as individuals rather than a systemic problem, and just being distracted from the fact that it is the top 1% who emit the vast, vast majority of pollution throughout the world. In some ways, I think the conclusion I've come to for the service and thinking about it is it doesn't really matter what our individual thoughts are, and I don't think there is a right thought. I'm perfectly acceptable to agree or disagree about what you think is an appropriate action. The reality is there are enough people at this moment who have decided that, yes, the situation is so dire that it is something that we need to undertake. I want to close with the words of Andreas Malm. Things have shifted in the sense that if you know something about the climate crisis, you know the situation is extremely dire. And that gives you a kind of sympathy for the idea that some people might want to take things into their own hands, or at least a measure of understanding of the frustration. And I think this is what the film is showing as well. Clearly, not everyone is blowing up pipelines. I don't know if anyone is doing it. Malm continues, but the idea that the big crime is to build a pipeline and not potentially blow it up, that idea has a very broad appeal. Our closing hymn is We Rise, and this was a song that was written by Batya Levine, who was inspired after going out to the protests at Standing Rock, where the Dakota Access Pipeline was set to cross the Missouri River, the source of drinking water for the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation and others in the region. And even after an enormous protest effort and after many protesters were injured and some were imprisoned, the pipeline was built. But shortly thereafter, after Donald Trump was elected, she recalled it was a moment of deep fear and despair as we watched a campaign built on white supremacy and racism win. I felt a profound sense of hopelessness She searched within herself for some source of strength and hope and remembered the resistance of the protesters at Standing Rock. They then began to sing. "We Rise" is the song they wrote that day. So I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. I'm going to invite you to sing the chorus, but I'll start with the verses, and if you want to join in on the rise part, that's welcome. So. We rise, humbly hearted rise, won't be divided rise, with Spirit to guide us rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here. Sing that with me. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here and we rise. All of the children rise. Elders with wisdom rise. Ancestors surround us rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here and we rise. Up from the wreckage rise. With tears and with courage rise. Fighting for life we rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. One more time. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. I invite you to reach out and take a hand, make a connection, touch a shoulder, bump elbows, whatever feels comfortable to you. To those of you joining us on Zoom, I invite you to send your energy out to those others on Zoom and out to those of us here as we send our energy back to you. And I close with these words from Batya Levine. May we believe in our collective power and resilience and learn to live it as we work to dismantle the oppressive forces within ourselves and in the world around us. No matter what struggles lie ahead, may we keep fighting and rising for and with each other. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be. And so letter writing will be starting in the pavilion in just a few minutes.